In 1939, Victor Frankl found himself herded onto a train with 1,500 other individuals. He had to leave his home country of Austria with a suitcase filled with whatever meager belongings he could salvage. They were squashed 80 into a coach. All of them had to lie on top of their luggage. The carriages were so full that only the top parts of the window could let in the grey of dawn. They'd been travelling for several days and nights without anything to eat when the train suddenly shunted, obviously nearing a main station. With the progressive dawn, the outlines of a vast camp were visible. Long stretches of several rows of barbed wire fences, watchtowers, searchlights, and long columns of ragged human figures in the grey mist, trekking along the straight, desolate roads to a destination they did not know. They were shouted commands as the carriage doors opened and they were flung off the train. 1,500 captives were cooped up in a shed designed to accommodate roughly 300 at most. They were cold and hungry and there was no room to squat on the bare ground. Nearly everyone in their group was still under the illusion that all would be well. They did not yet understand the meaning of the scene that was still to follow. They were put into lines with men on the one side and women on the other side. A man with an air of authority stood in front of them, and as they moved forward, he casually signaled his finger either to the left or to the right. None of them had the slightest clue as to the sinister meaning behind that little movement of a man's finger pointing now to the right and now to the left, but far more frequently to the left. As Victor Frankl slowly moved forward, the man put his hands on his shoulders and slowly maneuvered his body to the right. The significance of the finger game was only explained later on that evening. It was the first of many such selection processes, the first verdict as to whether they continued to live or whether they died. For the vast majority of their group, that is about 90% of them, it meant death. Their sentence would be carried out in the next few hours. Those men who were signaled to the left were marched straight to the gas chambers. This building, as they were told by somebody who worked there, had the words bath written over the door in all different kinds of European languages. On entering, each individual was handed a piece of soap. They then walked to their deaths. It fully took them 13 minutes to die. For those men who were pointed to the right, they were sent to the cleansing station where they were stripped naked, beaten with straps, and shaved of all of their bodily hair. They were stripped of all of their possessions and they were given a rag uniform which would have made a scarecrow elegant by comparison. It was then that the first phase of their psychological reaction took place. They struck out their former lives. They literally had no material links to their previous lives whatsoever. They were surrounded by filth, and death was their daily companion, to the extent that death lost its meaning. It no longer moved them. Victor Frankl describes a scene where a captive who was suffering from typhus fell to the ground and died right in front of them. He watched without any emotional upset the scene which then followed, which was repeated over and over again with each subsequent death. One by one, the prisoners approached the still, warm, lifeless body. One grabbed the remains of a messy pot of potatoes. Another decided that the shoes he was wearing were an improvement on his own and exchanged them. A third did the same with a coat that he was wearing. The dead man's body was eventually dragged over the bumpy floor and was then taken outside. He looked out of the sole window, clutching a bowl of warm, watery soup, which he sipped greedily. The corpse, which had just been removed, stared in at him with glazed eyes. Just 2 hours earlier, he had been talking to this man. And now, he continued to sip his soup. His parents, his brother and his wife died in the camps or were sent to the gas ovens. Except for his sister, his entire family died. Frankl suffered regular torture and countless indignities, never knowing from one moment to the next if his path would lead to the ovens or whether he would be amongst the spared who would have to shovel the ashes of those that were. One day, naked and alone in a small room, he became aware of what he later called the last of the human freedoms. They controlled his environment. They could do whatever they wanted to his physical body. But Victor Frankl himself was a self-aware being who could look on as an observer at his very involvement. His basic identity was intact. He could decide how all of this was going to affect him. He had the power and the freedom to choose how he was going to respond. He shares the following. I remember a personal experience. Almost in tears from pain, I had terrible sores on my feet from wearing torn shoes. I limped a few kilometers with our long column of men from the camp to our work site. Very cold, bitter winds struck us. I kept thinking of the endless little problems of our miserable life. What would there be to eat tonight? If a piece of sausage came as an extra ration, should I exchange it for a piece of bread? Should I trade my last cigarette, which was left from a bonus I received a fortnight ago, for a bowl of soup? How could I get a piece of wire to replace the fragments which served as one of my shoelaces? Would I get to our work site in time to join my usual working party? Or would I have to join another which might have a brutal foreman? What could I do to get on good terms with the carper who could help me to obtain work in camp instead of undertaking this horribly long daily march? I became disgusted with the state of affairs which compelled me daily and hourly to think of only such trivial things. I forced my thoughts to turn to another subject. Suddenly I saw myself on the platform of a well-lit, warm and pleasant lecture room. In front of me sat an attentive audience on comfortable, upholstered seats. I was giving a lecture in the psychology of the concentration camp. All that oppressed me at that moment became objective, seen and described from the remote viewpoint of science. And by this method, I succeeded somehow in rising above the situation, above the sufferings of the moment, and I observed them as if they were already of the past. He continues, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, the ability to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And there were always choices to make. Every day, every hour offered the opportunity to make a decision which determined whether you would or would not submit to those powers which threatened to rob you of your very self, your inner freedom, which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance. I'm going to repeat that. Which determined whether or not you would become the plaything of circumstance, renouncing freedom and dignity to become molded into the typical form of the inmate. It was in those moments that Victor Frankl realized that he was becoming increasingly more aware of the thought processes inside of his head. He realized that despite the dire circumstances, he could alter his attitude. He could choose the way that he responded. The world is a challenging place at the moment. I look around me and I see the despair in people's faces. I recognize those same feelings of despair inside of myself. My wife and I have recently settled in Cairo, where she's an educator. And it's been far more difficult than anticipated for me to get business in the region. Language is a barrier. I don't speak Arabic, and not many here speak English. Our oldest son is in Bermuda, and we have another son and daughter that are continuing their studies in Cape Town, our home city. And this has proven to be quite a challenge as well, particularly with all the negativity that is taking place in South Africa at the moment. No matter where in the world you may be watching from right now, I know that you see this despair around you, and you may even be experiencing it too. You can sense that this mental state doesn't serve you. You know that it's not helping you to show up in the world as the best version of yourself. If you are a leader or a team member, you know that you're not helping your team. It's certainly not easy, but there is great power in recognizing that we have the ability to choose our response to whatever is going on around us at the moment. It is in these moments of awareness that we realize that it is our response that matters most. Of course, things can hurt us physically or financially, but it is in our most difficult experiences that we forge our character and we develop our internal powers, where we learn how to handle difficult situations in the future and how we can help others to do so as well. This week, let's become more aware of the thought processes that are taking place inside of our head and how they're impacting our emotional states and our behavior. Think about how all of this impacts the important people in your life. Be more empathic. Be more kind. Do more good. And as Victor Frankl did, keep your eyes on a crystal clear image of the future and keep moving forward. Keep taking massive action. If you want to learn more about Victor Frankl and about his experiences during the concentration camps in World War II, read his book, Man's Search for Meaning. It will radically alter the way that you think. That's all for today, folks. If you found this content useful, please subscribe to my channel, hit the like button, and share the video with your friends. Have a fantastic week, and until next time, cheers.